I want to start this episode with something a lot of people have already experienced. The moment where nothing about you changed, except how you looked, and suddenly everyone treated you better. Strangers smiled at you, people listened when you spoke, you got more opportunities, more patience, more forgiveness, more interest. But it's the same personality, same intelligence, same humor, same you, different treatment. And for a lot of people, that moment isn't hypothetical. It's what happens after a glow up. And the reason that experience feels so disorienting is because it exposes something we're not really supposed to say out loud. People don't just respond to who you are, they respond to how you look. And once you see that shift happen in real time, you can't unsee it. Because suddenly every compliment feels a little different, every opportunity feels a little suspect. You've seen the difference, you've lived the before, and you're living the after. And that changes you. So today, we're talking about glow ups, pretty privilege, and the psychological whiplash of being treated like you matter only after you fit the standard. Because this is not just about beauty, this is about perception, bias, power, and what it does to your identity when the world suddenly decides you're worth more than it did before. There's a very specific kind of story that keeps coming up. Not because people love telling it, but because once you see it, you can't unsee it. Someone loses weight, or clears their skin, changes their style, or gets cosmetic work done, and suddenly their life changes. More attention, more validation, more romantic interest, more professional opportunities. And people notice that shift. They talk about it, they compare the before and after, they try to make sense of what changed. Because it doesn't just feel like transformation, it's exposure. The realization that nothing about who you are changed, and yet the way people treat you did. Because if the world starts treating you better without you becoming a better person, then what exactly is being rewarded? And more importantly, what was being withheld before? So before we go any further, I feel like I need to say this. This is not about blaming people for wanting to look better. This is not about pretending appearance doesn't matter. And this is definitely not about shaming anyone for participating in beauty culture, because we all participate in it, one way or another. That's not the point. The point is the system those changes exist inside of. Because there is a difference between changing how you look and realizing that how you looked was quietly shaping how you were treated the entire time. And once people experience that shift, it doesn't just feel validating. For a lot of people, it feels unsettling. So let's get into it. If we want to understand why glow ups feel so powerful, we have to start with one of the most well documented biases in psychology, the halo effect. I've spoken about this before, but we're going to talk about it again. First studied by psychologist Edward Thorndike in the early 20th century, the halo effect describes our tendency to assume that if someone has one positive trait, they must have others. So if someone is attractive, we are more likely to assume they are intelligent, kind, competent, trustworthy, capable, even when we have zero evidence for any of those things. Decades of research in social psychology have confirmed this bias across contexts: education, hiring, dating, even criminal sentencing. Attractive people are consistently rated more favorably, even when their actual performance is identical to others. And this is where things start getting uncomfortable, because it means that when someone has a glow up, people don't just see them as more attractive, they start seeing them as better, smarter, more capable, more worthy of attention, which leads to a very uncomfortable realization. The opportunities weren't created by the glow up, they were already there. You were just locked out of them before. We tend to talk about pretty privilege like it's just a social media concept, but it's not. It's measurable. Research in labor economics and social psychology has been showing this for decades. Economist Daniel Hamermesh, who literally wrote the book Beauty Pays, found that more attractive people tend to earn more money over time. He calls it the beauty premium, and it's not small. Some estimates suggest that attractive individuals can earn thousands more per year than their less attractive counterparts, simply because of how they're perceived. And on the flip side, there's also a penalty, sometimes called the ugliness penalty: lower wages, fewer promotions, less opportunity. And it's not just about money. Classic studies in social psychology, like the What is Beautiful is Good research by Karen Dion and her colleagues, found that people consistently assume attractive individuals are more intelligent, more competent, and even more morally good before they've said a single word. Think about that. We are assigning character based on appearance. And that bias doesn't stay in theory, it shows up everywhere. In classrooms where teachers give more attention to certain students, in hospitals where some patients are taken more seriously than others, in workplaces where competence gets filtered through appearance. There's even research showing that attractive defendants in court are more likely to receive lighter sentences than less attractive ones. Same behavior, different outcome. So when someone experiences a glow up and suddenly feels like the world opened up, they're not imagining it, they're not being dramatic. They're stepping into a different category, a different set of assumptions, a different level of access. Because what changed wasn't just how they looked, it's how they were being read. And perception is everything. Now, here's where this gets psychologically messy. Because glow ups don't just change how people see you, they change how you see yourself. And not always in a clean, empowering way. Psychologists have a term for what happens when your internal sense of self no longer matches how the world is responding to you: cognitive dissonance. First introduced by psychologist Leon Festinger, cognitive dissonance describes the mental tension that occurs when two realities don't line up. And that's exactly what a glow up can create. Because your identity was formed in one social reality, and now you're being treated as if you belong to another. Same person, different response. And your brain has to reconcile with that. There's also something called self-discrepancy theory, developed by E. Torrey Higgins, which explains how distress happens when there's a gap between how you see yourself and how you believe others see you. And after a glow up, that gap can get very wide, very fast. Because internally, you still feel like your before self, but externally, you're being treated like someone else entirely. More desirable, more valuable, more worthy of attention. And that disconnect, it creates tension, suspicion, sometimes even grief. And this isn't just anecdotal. Clinical research on people who experience significant weight loss has found that even after major physical changes, many individuals continue to identify with their former bodies and report a lag in self perception, where their internal identity hasn't caught up to how others now see them. Some studies also describe a sense of disorientation in social interactions, where people struggle to reconcile new attention, new treatment, and a new social position with an older sense of self. So when people say, I still feel like the same person, they mean that literally, but the world doesn't respond to them like they're the same person anymore. And that's where things start to fracture, because you're forced to confront something uncomfortable. If people are kinder now, were they always capable of that kindness? And if they were, why didn't you get it before? This is where the glow up narrative starts to crack, because it's not just a story of gain, it's also a story of loss. A loss of innocence, loss of trust, loss of the belief that people see you for who you are. Sociologist Irving Goffman wrote about how identity is shaped through social interaction, how we come to understand who we are partly through how others respond to us. So when those responses change suddenly, your sense of self doesn't just evolve, it destabilizes. Because you're left trying to make sense of something that doesn't fully add up. You haven't changed, but the way people respond to you has. There's another part of pretty privilege that doesn't get talked about enough, and that's the cost. Because what people don't tell you about a glow up is that it can feel like trading one kind of invisibility for another. Before, you're overlooked, dismissed, not taken seriously, passed over. And then after, you're seen, but not necessarily understood, not necessarily respected. Now you're visible, but flattened, reduced to how you look. Psychologists have studied this through something called objectification theory, developed by Barbara Fredrickson and Tommy Ann Roberts. Their work shows that women, in particular, are often treated less as full people and more as bodies to be evaluated, to be looked at, judged, consumed. And the more attractive you're perceived to be, the more intense that can become. So instead of being ignored, you're watched. Instead of being dismissed, you're scrutinized. Instead of being underestimated, you're mischaracterized. Suddenly, you're objectified, sexualized, envied, judged, and in many cases, not taken seriously. There's research showing that highly attractive women can actually be penalized in professional settings, especially in roles that require authority or competence. Because in those contexts, beauty gets read as a contradiction. You can be attractive, or you can be taken seriously, but often not both. So the same system that rewards beauty also limits you through it. You're not just seen as a person anymore. You're seen as an image, a symbol, something to look at, not necessarily someone to listen to, and that creates a different kind of pressure. Because now you're not just navigating being unseen, you're navigating being seen in a way that doesn't reflect who you actually are. And that can feel just as distorting, just as limiting, just in a different way. The reason glow-ups hit people so hard emotionally is because they don't just reveal something new, they confirm something you already knew, even if you couldn't fully name it at the time. Because we are all, in one way or another, taught the same message, that how you look affects how you're treated, that fitting the standard gets rewarded, and not fitting it comes with consequences. Sometimes subtle, sometimes obvious, but always there. So when a glow-up changes how people respond to you, it doesn't feel like a random shift. It feels like proof. Proof that the kindness, the attention, the opportunities were never unconditional. They were contingent on presentation, on aesthetics, on how closely you matched what society rewards. And psychologically, that lands differently. Because it doesn't just change how you see others, it changes how you interpret your entire past. Rejection starts to look different. Missed opportunities take on a new meaning. And suddenly, your life story gets rewritten through a different lens. Not, I wasn't good enough, but I wasn't seen as good enough. And those are not the same thing. Here's the part where people usually want a clean resolution, a takeaway, a way to fix it. But this isn't one of those topics that wraps up neatly, because you can't unlearn the fact that appearance affects perception, and you can't fully control how you're perceived. What you can do is become aware of the system, aware of the bias, aware of the ways you might be participating in it, even unintentionally. Because the halo effect doesn't just affect how others see you, it affects how you see them, who you trust, who you listen to, who you give the benefit of the doubt. And once you see that clearly, you start making different choices, more conscious ones. So the next time you see a glow-up story or experience one yourself, pause before you immediately label it as self-improvement. Because what changed wasn't just you, it was how people treated you. And those are not the same thing. And that difference says a lot about how the world works. Beauty does open doors. That part is real. But it doesn't create value. It changes who is recognized as having it. And that should make you rethink everything you were taught about worth. I hope you enjoyed the episode and that it gave you something to sit with, my loves. Until next time, my love buckets, take care of yourselves and each other, and stay curious always. I'll be back with a brand new episode on the 21st of May. Bye. My goodness, that was a juicy kiss.
Make it clap, clap, clap. Make it clap, clap. Make it clap, clap. Make it clap, clap. Make it clap.